I think this is an important fight for Jake Paul, but there's a couple of issues I have with it. And one thing is I don't think...
What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So we're getting Paul versus Fury this weekend, hopefully. There's been some pullouts, but it looks like this one's going to happen. And my question to you is, how do you see this fight playing out?
Well, we always cover legitimate fights on this page. And, a couple of years ago, if this fight would have happened, we probably wouldn't have discussed it as much. But Jake Paul is sort of showing us that he is taking this thing seriously and looking to move on to the next chapter that everybody wants to see him fight a real boxer. And Tommy Fury, look, there's all kinds of thoughts on him, good and bad, but at least he does tick the box that seems to be most important to everybody as far as Jake Paul's next opponent, which is he is a legitimate boxer. He comes from a boxing lineage. He's had 6 or 7 professional boxing matches against tomato cans, to say the absolute least, but he has still actually done it. He's not an MMA guy that's come over for a one-off night with Jake Paul. So I think this is an important fight for Jake Paul, but there's a couple of issues I have with it. And one thing is I don't think it's going to do as well pay-per-view wise as he was hoping it would. Jake Paul comes out and he fights big names like Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva, legitimate legends of MMA that are going to bring over the MMA fan base, that are going to come tune in to see their guys hopefully knock out Jake Paul. The boxers have never really wanted to get into the Jake Paul business, and they don't really know Tommy Fury like that. They sort of look at him as like a diet Jake Paul. He came from Love Island. He came from the celebrity world, and then he moved into boxing. And I understand he's Tyson's brother, but for the most part, I feel like people don't really respect Tyson Fury, and that's why the boxing community is just going to run away from this fight, and I don't know if they've garnered enough attention from just the masses that aren't fight fans to really pull big numbers.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and let's be honest, if Tommy didn't have the last name Fury, he would be roped into that quote-unquote celebrity or YouTube boxing status that people like to put Jake in. The reality is both of these guys have worked hard for the last couple of years. I think in a lot of ways, Jake more so than Tommy. We don't know the reason for the pullout of the last fight. If you believe what Tommy's camp said, it was that he was underprepared for the fight, and so that's a real cause for concern and a major red flag going into this fight. But I think both of these guys are on an even playing field, and yes, Tommy does check the box that a lot of people wanted to see checked. Fight somebody your own age, your own size, and who has a real boxing record. And as you pointed out, tomato cans to say the least for Tommy Fury's opposition. I personally think Jake's opposition is far better and far more experienced, even in the boxing ring, than a lot of Tommy Fury's opponents. We're talking about one gentleman, and his name slips me right now, that Tommy Fury fought, who has 10 wins against 102 losses. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I cannot believe that somebody's even allowed to compete professionally in a sport, especially a combat sport, where they've suffered 102 losses and God knows how many knockouts. So I think if you put Jake Paul against any of Tommy Fury's prior 7 or 8 opponents, Jake Paul finishes pretty much all of them, just like Tommy Fury finished about half of them and defeated all of them. So I think that these guys are starting on an even field. However, if I do give one particular advantage, it would be to Jake, and I think he's more powerful than Tommy. I think he's more powerful. I think he finds that right hand with better precision than Tommy does. We saw him put Tyron Woodley out with it. We saw him put Ben Askren out with it. And we saw him put Anderson Silva down with it, which is deeply impressive. And a lot of people like to say, oh, Anderson Silva, 47 years old, he's past his prime. Excuse me, Anderson Silva was one of the best strikers, if not the best striker, that the MMA world has ever seen. And just a year prior to his fight with Jake Paul, he dusted up Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. in Mexico, a former boxing world champion. So Anderson Silva, yeah, he's not a boxer, he's an MMA fighter, but make no mistake about it, he can get in there and he can throw 8-ounce gloves with the best of them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And, Tommy Fury is a muscle-bound guy. He looks great. He looks like a professional athlete. Jake Paul has really come along ever since he started taking his training very seriously, and now he looks like a legitimate pro athlete. And I think that their technique has gotten really good. Now, I don't think that they could be in there with the best of the best, which everybody always points out like, oh, well, if Jake Paul wants to be a boxer, why doesn't he box Tyson Fury? because that is not a competitive fight whatsoever. Give somebody who's roughly 6-0 in their early boxing career, somebody else who's roughly the same. Give them a 5-1 or a 10-2 type of guy, and let them gradually move up the ranks. This is an evenly matched fight for the most part, and I think that their skills are going to show early on in the fight, and they might dwindle a little bit. Every fight, as the fighters begin to get tired, starts to diminish as far as the skills go, but I think the first 3 rounds are going to be relatively competitive and look relatively high level, especially for two guys that are just 6 or 7-0. And I think as they get more tired and they start to get a little bit more desperate because they both clearly need and want to knock each other out, they're going to start exposing themselves a little bit too much. They're going to start to get a little bit more reckless, and then we're going to see the Jake Paul and Tommy Fury of old, the ones who are out there that look more like celebrity boxers than real boxers. And who knows, if that goes on from about round 4 to about round 10, we might have a sloppy show for the rest of the night. But I do think that Jake Paul's going to use that long jab that he likes to throw to the body and evade around the ring to win himself a few rounds early on, get up on the scorecards, and make Tommy Fury start to feel a little pressure both from the judges' scorecards, his corner, and then, of course, the masses that are watching, everybody that wants to see him and expects him to knock Jake Paul out. I think that's the game plan Jake's going to come in with. He's going to wait for Tommy to get sloppy, and then he's going to look for that big KO shot that he's got. Dude's got a lot of things going for him. Obviously, he doesn't need to fight, but one thing for certain about Jake Paul, he can throw hard.
Totally agree. And I'm picking Jake Paul to win this fight for 2 specific reasons. I believe that their skill sets are pretty equal, but Jake Paul does have more power than Tommy. And I think if he finds that right hand, he can put Tommy down and potentially finish him in the later rounds. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is Jake Paul thrives under pressure. He's the kind of person that when the world's against him, when he feels that heat, that pressure, people are paying to watch this, to see him get knocked out and make fun of him and talk about how he's not a real boxer. That's when he does his best work. It's like how Floyd Mayweather was back in the day. He would literally get people, 75% of the pay-per-view buys were people that hated him, wanted to see him get knocked out, and left $70 less rich and sorely disappointed. Jake Paul can rise to them. I'm not saying Jake Paul's anywhere in the realm of Floyd Mayweather, but as far as that goes and the ability to just put the world on your shoulders, be the villain, and go out there and perform, he can do that better than Tommy. I think Tommy is a little bit overshadowed by his family. You had his father and Tyson saying, look, we're going to disown him if he loses to this YouTuber Jake Paul. Tyson Fury is one of the best boxers in the world. I mean, if you look at who he's finished, it's the who's who of the heavyweight division. So a loss for the family, even though it's a different family member, to a YouTube fighter like Jake Paul is a massive hit to them. And I think Tommy's going to feel that going in. And I don't think he's going to be able to rise to the occasion and handle the pressure quite as well as Paul. I see it being kind of even in the beginning. And then I see Jake starting to chip away, win a few rounds, and get up on the scorecards. I think Tommy's going to get desperate about mid-fight. And I think he's going to get put down towards the end of the fight, maybe round 7, round 8. He's going to gas out. I don't think he's going to be quite as prepared for this as he should be. And I think he's going to eat a big power shot from Jake. And I think we're looking at a TKO 7th, 8th, 9th round.
That's a great prediction. And the kryptonite for all of Jake's former opponents was that they just wanted to go out there and make sure that they don't get knocked out by this guy. I can go out there and lose a decision, and then the internet will do the rest and say, oh, well, Jake Paul was gifted it, and it wasn't really an actual win. If you get knocked out by somebody, there's no way you can rewrite it. Nobody's going to let themselves just get knocked out clean like that. And I think that Tommy Fury is going to have that same issue. He's going to go out there and say, as long as I don't get knocked out by him, we can make the excuses later. And that can start to really slow a fighter down. It can actually shut somebody down completely. If you're afraid to throw and you're afraid to be free in there and you get really stiff just waiting and watching for somebody else's knockout shot, that's when you can get actually the most hurt. So Tommy Fury has got to go out there, be aggressive, and not worry about getting knocked out because it's Jake Paul. You might lose this fight. You might win this fight. You might get knocked out. You might not. But if all you do is go out there and try to avoid the knockout, oddly enough, the knockout's going to find you.
Perfectly said. Fight to win. Don't fight not to lose. So what is your final prediction? Do you think Jake's going to win this fight? Do you think he's going to finish Tommy? Do you think it's going to be a controversial decision? So many things could happen here.
Totally. I think we're going to see some good boxing in the early parts of the fight. And then as this fight goes on and they both go into these later rounds that they're not experienced in, we're going to see some sloppy technique that's going to wind up leaving Tommy exposed, and Jake Paul's going to get the knockout.
So TKO as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching this video, guys. We're your hub for all things combat sports. If that's your jam, we appreciate a subscribe and a like on the video, and drop us a comment down below. We'll see you next time.
Peace.